My name is Ed Vanderpool. I am IT Technical Manager for Enterprise Network, and I work for Adventist Health West. So we have been using Firepower's series for at least the last 6 years. So we're kind of a staggered right now. The Firepower Management Console is at 7.0, and most of our Firepower units are at 6.6. The deployment, we have two areas. We have them as edge at our markets, which we term our hospitals as markets. But each one of the hospitals will have a HA pair of Firepower model. And we also have them in our core within the ACI infrastructure. So we use them as a core firewall along with an edge firewall. Sure. So the 7.0 Firepower, we specifically are using as several different areas, our use cases. We have them as a IPS within the core, IPS on the edge, and we're also using the AnyConnect client as our basis for VPN connection into corporate and other applications. The features that we find really the biggest bang for the buck are for the Firepower overall. We're looking at obviously AnyConnect, which I just mentioned, is one of the big features. The other features are IPS, along with the geo tagging and the geo sync features. And of course the firewall, the basic subset of firewall infrastructure and policy management. Yes, so we've looked at other vendors, but Cisco by far has taken the lead with a holistic approach where we don't have to manage, multiple different edges at one time. We can actually push policy out from our core out to the edge. The policy can be as granular as we need it to be. So the administration, also the upgradability of the edge is for us because we need to have it 24/7. The upgradability is also another piece. Management, logging, and all the other little aspects of the monitoring part. And so using deep package inspection, especially with 7.0, since it's just come out in 7.0, we're able to see really much more granular into the packet, where before we could actually kind of give a general overview using NetFlow. This gives us much more granularity into what is exactly happening on our network, and kind of snapping in the Cisco Stealth Watch piece gives us really the kind of end-to-end way of monitoring our network and making sure that it's secure. So that's one of the reasons that we ended up going with Cisco, because the ease of use, basically having one UI to be able to control all of our end devices, policy, geolocation, AnyConnect, all the different pieces of that in one area has been phenomenal. Oh yeah, there's several actually, because before we were trying to stamp out, security threats, security issues. It was a one-off type of way to attack it. Spent a lot of manpower on trying to track down the individual issues or kind of flare-ups that we would see. With Cisco's Firepower management overall, we're able to have that push up to one, basically one monitor, one UI, be able to track that, be able to stop threats immediately. And it also gives us a little more granularity on what those threats might be. Hundreds. We are able to, for killing threats, we're able to, it's several hundred actually now in comparison to the one-off that we used to be able to do. So we're currently not using the microsegmentation yet, although we've done a lot of preliminary testing with moving our firepower, the FMC, the firepower management console, and the firepower threat devices into ACI. It's preliminary, but that is our end goal, is to actually have that snapped into our infrastructure. Yes, we also use ICE, Cisco's ICE. So with the two combined, and being able to now with the 7.0 to be able to do SGTs more effectively, we're able to really kind of tighten that down and to have it do auto blocking, where before you would have to do a one-off blocking. If a severity comes in at a certain level, we can actually have it kill that connection entirely, all the way down to the port. So for us, it's actually using dynamic policies is very important for us. Number one, because we do not have the manpower to really kind of look at everything all the time. So having a dynamic way of really registering, looking at, and having certain actions tied to that are incredibly effective for us in slowing any kind of threat. So we're getting there. As far as using the application, using it to go to the application level, that's kind of we're at the infancy of that. We're looking at definitely tying that into our critical applications so that we can see exactly what they're doing, when they're doing it, and being able to track that. Not yet. Again, so looking at tagging within the firepower infrastructure, because we do have a AWS and we do use VMware. We're currently not there. In the next year, we'll probably be tagging those a lot more effectively, but at this point, we're not using that. Yes, with the advent of 3.0, comparatively to 2x, we have seen actually at least a 10 to 15% increase on speed, where it seems to be more effective. The updates seem to be more effective on finding malicious information. And yes, we've definitely seen at least a 10 to 15% increase on tying policy to 3.0. Yes, because previously what we would have had to have done if we were not using Cisco's firepower, we would have had either Cisco ASA or another manufacturer, but typically a Cisco ASA, and we would have had those everywhere. We would have had still 2 at every site, several within our infrastructure, but the management of those is much more difficult because it's done by one-off. As far as saving Adventist Health money, I would have to say that it's not necessarily the actual physical product, but the time, labor that we would have had to have to be able to monitor and administrate that, and also the time to find malicious issues and security areas that we were unable to see before. So it's tough to put a cost on that, but it would probably be several $100,000 overall. If you're looking at, whether we got hit with malware or with, some of the other issues that we're seeing, especially within healthcare. So it's really kind of a tough question to answer as far as how much money that would save us, because thus far we have not been hacked, knocking on wood. And if we were, that would cost us millions. So Firepower has been definitely a partnership, moving that ahead and not getting that. So one of the few things that I brought up, and I've been on some of the betas in the past, but Firepower, it does a great job as far as overall management. It would be great, and I know you guys are like right there, but being able to have a cloud instance of that, and also not only just a cloud instance, but one of the areas that we've looked at is using an HA type of cloud Being able to have a device, a file, the FMC within a cloud. If we had an issue with one, the other one would pick up automatically. The other part of that, and this has been huge throughout the version 6 of Firepower, but applying policy still takes longer than we expect. So, and I know every version that comes out, the speed is actually increased, but I would love to see that, even a little more as far as when we're actually deploying policy. We found that the initial setup using Firepower products was actually very simple. The initial configuration for the management console, very straightforward. Adding devices usually takes a few minutes, and then once you've got them actually physically set up in your management console, it's streamlined. It's actually very simple. Sure. So what we've done, one of the great features of having the Cisco Firepower Management Console is to be able to group. So we have each one of our hospitals as a group, so we can actually do any kind of device configuration within a group. They're HA, so that when we do an upgrade, it is seamless, because when it fires off the upgrade, it will actually force the HA over automatically as part of the upgrade. And the other part of that is policy management. We have several policies, but specifically one for the general use at our hospitals. That has been phenomenal because you basically build out one policy and you can push that out to all of your end nodes with one push. The amount of staff that we need to actually implement and devise the initial configuration, setting up the devices is 2. Very, very simple. The roles for Adventist Health, you have to be at least a senior or an architect in order to manage any type of firewalling, whether that's the IPS the actual firewall itself, or any connect. So we have a senior network engineers that are basically assigned for that task. So for maintaining the firepower, we typically have one person that will actually kind of rotate through the group. There's a senior network engineer that will maintain that on a daily basis. Typically, it doesn't take maintenance every day. The biggest maintenance for us comes to updating policy, verifying the geolocation information is correct, and any kind of upgrades in the future. So typically that takes about 1 to 2 people. So for us, we have not actually used any external authority as far as setting up maintenance, configuration. It's all come directly from Cisco. Because of our partnership with Cisco, we have had a fantastic cast of system engineers and TAC when needed. So we've actually we haven't had to go out of our our partnership with Cisco to actually implement these or to upgrade or update. Adventist Health has been using Cisco for many years. One of the huge pieces for us is, of course, the supportability and ongoing update, maintenance, care and feeding. We've had a great relationship with Cisco. The TAC is outstanding. Typically, we will open a TAC case and they will know exactly what the issue is within, I would say, 2 to 3 hours, if it's a very difficult one. Typically, they even know what it is when we actually open the case and they're like, oh yeah, well, we've seen that before and fix. So we've actually had a fantastic relationship with working with Cisco, fast turnaround, great tech support, and have not run into any issues thus far with the firepower overall. So for us, we've been using firepower, the threat defense and the management console for about 6.5 years. And I think we've had maybe 2 issues with it, and most of those were due to either our policy settings, something that we messed up. Our physical has been, we've had zero downtime, never had to return a box, and we've never run into any major bugs that have actually hindered the actual security of the system. So scalability so far has been fantastic because we started with probably 4 firepower threat defense boxes, but really after that, now we've got 14, and we're going to be pushing that probably to 44 to 46 devices. And thus far, the manageability for all of those devices and actually the implementation has been pretty seamless and pretty easy. So it's been great. So for Advanced Health, we've been utilizing it now again for about 6.5 years. We use it exclusively for Edge and Core, for Firewall and for policy and for IPS and AnyConnect. We plan on continuing to integrate that tighter. So in the future, we probably will not grow that many number of physical devices, but we plan on actually integrating those tighter into the system, tighter with integration with Cisco's ICE, tighter integration with our ACI infrastructure. So at the end of the day, we don't see us going any further away from using Firepower as our core security edge device. Yeah, so prior to actually using Firepower, we were still a Cisco shop. We used the Cisco ASA exclusively, and the ASA was fantastic. But again, with the advent of the Firepower, being able to manage, monitor, upgrade has really cut back our time on those processes by less than half of what we had before. So, but before we were using the good old ASA for many years. Sure. So we actually did look at another vendor when we were looking at initially grabbing Firepower to bring in as our corporate firewall and our main inspection engine. So we did look at Palo Alto, and we also looked at Juniper's SRX series, but both of those didn't really have kind of the overall manageability and tightness with the Cisco infrastructure as we would want it to. So there was nothing necessarily security-wise wrong with them, but they were not a good fit for our environment. All right, so Cisco's pricing and their pricing is actually pretty good. We get obviously a decent discount, but when you look across the board, and if you're looking at that, if you're looking at a Cisco firewall, Firepower device, or a Palo Alto device, or say a Juniper device, they're going to be pretty comparable. A lot of people say, oh, Cisco is so expensive, but when you boil it down, when you look at the licensing structure for Firepower, you look at the actual device cost and how much that costs over time. They pretty much are right in line, if not less, depending on what you're buying for the Firepower. So we've actually had a great run with that, and we feel confident that we're getting the best price. And the supportability of that, I haven't seen anything better. So one of the things that we looked at is with the advent of SecureX and the kind of overall package that gives you as part of just purchasing the Firepower and having the licensure, the licensing. That by far is a less expensive and more intuitive for daily use than some of the other vendors that have their product out there. And the fact that it actually comes as part of the whole holistic package is fantastic. We can't beat that. Probably the biggest lesson that we've learned is in a couple different ways. One is how to keep your policy clean. We've learned really how to keep that, from over overextending what you want to do. It also has great feedback as you're building that out, so that you can look at it and figure out, okay, so how am I going to be able to really implement this in a way that won't break something or that won't overshadow some other policy that I have. So that's probably one of the biggest things that we've learned really in it, because the way that you build out your policy and the way that you use that on a daily basis is very intuitive. And it also, like I said, gives you a lot of feedback as you're building that out. Sure. So, so the advice that I would give anybody looking at firepower is look at it from really an overall standpoint. If you want something that you can monitor well, you can administrate well, you can update very quickly, and it gives you all of the security aspects that really anybody else can on the market, it's going to be really hard to beat. Because with the management console, you've got one tool that you can actually do the device updates, device configuration, and all the policy management in one area. So I would say definitely take a look at it. It's got a great UI. It's very straightforward to use. It is very intuitive, and it works really well out of the box. And it does not take a math science to be able to implement it. So I'd probably rate firepower overall with an 8.5 or a 9. Uh, I can't think of anything that would be a 10, just because, unless it has like some kind of Alexa built in where I can just tell it what to do. So the reality is I would probably look at about an 8.5, just because it's mature, it's effective, and it's usable.